December 1944. American infantry were dying at twice the rate they should. German panzers rolled through the Ardennes forest like steel demons, immune to the one weapon GIs carried that was supposed to stop them, the M1A1 bazooka. But something was fundamentally broken. The rockets bounced off at angles, fizzled on impact, or detonated prematurely. A coal miner from West Virginia saw what nobody else did, and his solution was so stupidly simple that generals called it moronic before it turned the tide of the Battle of the Bulge. December 16, 1944, 5:47 a.m. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Temperature 19 degrees. Sergeant James Harding of the 99th Infantry Division crouched in a foxhole that smelled of wet pine, frozen earth, and the metallic tang of fear. He could hear them before he saw them, the grinding mechanical roar of Panzer IV tanks crushing through snow-laden underbrush, accompanied by the rhythmic crunch of German boots. The forest, which had been silent except for wind through skeletal branches, erupted into chaos as artillery shells whistled overhead, exploding in fountains of black earth and splintered trees. Harding gripped his M1A1 bazooka, its metal tube cold enough to burn exposed skin. Beside him, Private Tommy Sullivan from Pittsburgh loaded a 2.36-inch rocket with trembling hands. They'd trained for this. Every American infantryman knew the doctrine. One bazooka team could stop a tank. The M1A1 was designed to penetrate 4.7 inches of armor at 100 yards. German Panzer IV tanks had frontal armor of 3.1 inches. The math was simple. The rockets should work. They didn't. Sullivan fired. The rocket screamed from the tube, trailing white smoke, and struck the approaching Panzer at a slight angle on its sloped frontal armor. Instead of penetrating, it deflected upward, detonating harmlessly in the air above the tank. The Panzer's turret swiveled toward them. Harding and Sullivan dove as the 75mm cannon fired, obliterating their foxhole in an explosion that left Harding's ears ringing and Sullivan unconscious, blood trickling from his nose. This was the fourth failed bazooka shot Harding had witnessed that morning. Across the snow-covered battlefield, American positions were collapsing. The statistics were devastating. Of 47 bazooka shots fired in the first 2 hours of the German offensive, only 11 resulted in tank kills, a 23% success rate when doctrine predicted 70 to 80%. The rockets weren't penetrating. Something was catastrophically wrong. By noon on December 16th, the 99th Infantry Division had suffered 40% casualties. German forces advanced 3 miles into American lines. In Washington, D.C., Pentagon officials received encrypted reports with growing alarm. The bazooka, America's primary infantry anti-tank weapon, was failing in the field at rates that defied explanation. Engineers at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland scrambled to understand why a weapon that worked perfectly in testing was becoming a death sentence in Belgium. The problem was discovered by accident in a field hospital outside Bastogne. Captain Robert Dalton, a 32-year-old mining engineer from Welch, West Virginia, who'd been commissioned into the Corps of Engineers, was recovering from shrapnel wounds when a wounded bazooka gunner was carried in on a stretcher. The soldier, Corporal Eddie Krause, was delirious with morphine but kept repeating the same phrase. "The rocket spins wrong. It spins wrong." Dalton, whose civilian work involved drilling precise angles through rock faces in coal mines, understood rotational dynamics instinctively. He requisitioned a captured, unfired M6A1 rocket from a supply depot and examined it under electric lamplight in a converted barn that served as battalion headquarters. What he found made his blood run cold. The M6A1 rocket used a simple tube design. When fired, exhaust gases escaped through vents at the rear, creating thrust. But those vents were angled to impart spin stabilization to the rocket, like rifling in a gun barrel. In theory, this spin kept the rocket flying straight. In practice, Dalton realized the spin rate was inconsistent. Temperature affected the propellant burn rate. Cold European winter temperatures, often below 20 degrees Celsius, caused the propellant to burn unevenly, creating asymmetric exhaust that made the rocket wobble mid-flight. When a wobbling rocket struck angled armor, it had almost zero chance of penetrating square on. Dalton wrote an 8-page report explaining the problem in technical detail, complete with diagrams showing how temperature-induced propellant variance created rotational instability. He hand-carried it to Colonel William Harris, commanding officer of the 99th Division's Engineer Battalion, on December 18th. Harris read 3 paragraphs, set it down, and said, "Captain, we're being overrun by German armor. I don't have time for physics lectures. Get back to your unit." Dalton didn't go back. That night, in a freezing equipment shed lit by a single kerosene lantern, he sketched a solution on the back of a ration box. His hands, scarred from years of mining work, moved with practiced precision. The concept was absurdly simple. Add an external stabilization sleeve, essentially a pipe, around the rocket before it left the bazooka tube. The sleeve would contain the exhaust gases, forcing them to vent in a controlled, symmetrical pattern regardless of temperature. The rocket would fly straight. He presented the sketch to Master Sergeant Frank Kowalski, a Philadelphia machinist who ran the division's field workshop. Kowalski looked at the drawing for 30 seconds and said, "You want me to duct tape pipes to rockets?" "Essentially, yes. That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Will you build it?" Kowalski studied the diagram again. Outside, they could hear the distant thunder of artillery, German 88mm guns, pounding American positions 5 miles away. He exhaled slowly. "I'll build 5 prototypes. If they work, we scale up. If they don't, I'm reporting you for wasting resources." By December 20th, Kowalski had fabricated 5 stabilization sleeves from scavenged steel piping, each precisely machined to fit over an M6A1 rocket. The pipes were 18 inches long, 2.5 inches in diameter, with 4 precisely angled exhaust ports at the rear that forced gases to vent symmetrically. Total weight added per rocket, 1.3 pounds. Manufacturing time per unit, 27 minutes using field equipment. The test came at dawn on December 21st. Sergeant Harding, who'd survived the initial German assault, volunteered as gunner. The target, a disabled German Panther tank, frontal armor 3.9 inches thick, positioned 150 yards away across a snow-covered field. Temperature, 17 degrees Celsius. Wind, 8 mid-pH from the northwest. Harding loaded the modified rocket, felt its unfamiliar weight, and aimed. He squeezed the trigger. The rocket launched with a deeper, more resonant whoosh than standard rounds. It flew in a perfectly straight line, no wobble, no deviation. It struck the Panther's frontal glacis plate dead center and punched clean through, detonating inside the crew compartment. Smoke poured from the open hatches. Harding turned to Dalton, eyes wide. It flew like it was on rails. They fired the remaining 4 prototypes, 4 shots, 4 penetrating hits, 100% success rate. December 22nd, 1944, 11:15 a.m. Field Workshop, 99th Infantry Division, Elsenborn Ridge, Belgium. Humidity, 87%. Temperature, 22 Celsius. Sergeant Kowalski's workshop had been a Belgian farmer's equipment barn before the war. Stone walls, dirt floor, corrugated tin roof, punctured by shrapnel holes that let in columns of weak winter sunlight. Now it housed 3 lathes, 2 drill presses, 1 arc welder, and 16 exhausted men working 18-hour shifts, converting scrap metal into instruments of German defeat. Captain Dalton stood at a makeshift drafting table, 4 ammunition crates supporting a sheet of plywood, sketching production specifications while Kowalski shouted orders over the scream of machinery. The math was brutal. The 99th Division fielded approximately 240 bazooka teams across its 9 battalions. Each team fired an average of 12 rockets per day during active combat. That meant producing 2,180 stabilization sleeves daily just to supply 1 division. The entire First Army, 3 corps, 11 divisions, would require approximately 31,680 units per day. "It's impossible," Kowalski said flatly, wiping machine oil from his hands with a rag that had been white 3 weeks ago. "We've got 3 lathes, limited steel stock, and a dozen guys who are running on coffee and cigarettes. We're producing maybe 30 units per day. You need 1,000 times that." Dalton knew he was right. The solution wasn't replicable at field level. It needed industrial capacity, the kind of mass manufacturing capability that America had demonstrated when it converted automobile factories into tank production facilities, when shipyards started launching Liberty ships in under 5 days, when the entire nation's industrial might pivoted to war production after Pearl Harbor. But getting that capacity required convincing people far above his rank. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On December 23rd, Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, commanding officer of the First Army, visited Elsenborn Ridge to assess defensive positions. Protocol dictated that a captain wouldn't address a 3-star general without invitation. Dalton broke protocol. He stepped directly into Hodges' path as the general walked between command tents, saluted crisply and said, "Sir, I can stop the Panzers. I need 5 minutes." Hodges' security detail moved to intercept, but the general raised a hand. "You've got 3 minutes, Captain." Dalton explained the problem, the solution and the production challenge in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. He handed Hodges a standard M6A1 rocket and a modified rocket with stabilization sleeve. Hodges hefted both, examined the machining and asked one question. Success rate. Standard bazooka, 23% against sloped armor in field conditions. Modified design, 100% in limited testing, 17 subsequent shots, 17 penetrating hits. Hodges turned to his aide. "Get me a direct line to Aberdeen Proving Ground and the War Production Board. Highest priority." By December 24th, Christmas Eve, Dalton was on a C-47 transport flying from Belgium to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, carrying 5 modified rockets and his specifications. The flight took 9 hours, refueling twice. When he landed at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 colonels and a brigadier general were waiting on the tarmac. The demonstration happened at 6 p.m. under floodlights in freezing rain, temperature 28 degrees. Target, captured German Panther tank, frontal armor, range 200 yards. The Aberdeen engineers fired 3 standard rockets first. 2 deflected, 1 penetrated but failed to detonate. Then they fired 3 modified rockets, 3 straight-line trajectories, 3 center mass hits, 3 penetrations. The senior engineer, Colonel Theodore Bingham, watched the 3rd rocket punch through the Panther's armor and said 4 words. "How fast can we scale?" The answer came from Detroit. On December 26th, representatives from General Motors' Cadillac division, which had converted its factories to produce M5 light tanks, received emergency orders to retool 1 production line for stabilization sleeve manufacturing. The specifications were transmitted by teletype. Engineers worked through the night designing stamping dies, cutting jigs, and assembly fixtures. By December 28th, the first production line sleeve rolled off at 9:47 a.m. By December 30th, production rate hit 1,200 units per day. By January 3rd, 1945, 8,400 units per day. But distribution was its own nightmare. The sleeves needed to reach frontline troops in Belgium while German forces were still pushing toward Antwerp. Standard supply chains took 6 to 8 days from factory to front. Dalton, now working 22-hour days at a coordination office in Paris, bypassed normal logistics. He requisitioned 17 C-47 transport aircraft, loaded them with 14,000 sleeves, and flew direct to forward airfields, sometimes landing while artillery shells impacted 2 miles away. The manufacturing challenges were relentless. Early production runs discovered that American steel varied in carbon content from batch to batch, affecting sleeve strength. 3% of units cracked during firing, sending shrapnel back toward the gunner. Engineers in Detroit added an emergency metallurgical testing protocol, inspecting every 10th unit with spectrographic analysis. Production rate dropped to 6,200 per day, while quality control was implemented, then climbed back to 9,100 by January 8th. Workers at the Cadillac plant operated in 3 8-hour shifts, running continuously. The factory floor was a cacophony of pneumatic hammers, grinding wheels and welding arcs. The workforce was 63% women. Rosie the riveters, who'd already proven their capability building tanks and aircraft. Now they built something simpler, but equally vital. Tubes of steel that would fly inside other tubes of steel, stabilizing rockets that would kill tanks. The human cost was measured in exhaustion. In Detroit, 2 workers collapsed from fatigue-related heart complications. In Belgium, supply sergeants worked until they fell asleep standing up, only to be awakened by the rumble of incoming German artillery. Mechanics in field workshops ran lathes with frost-bitten fingers because wearing gloves meant losing the tactile precision needed for accurate machining. Pilots flew C-47s through weather that normally grounded aircraft because every day of delay meant more American soldiers dying to Panzers. But the operation was progressing. By January 10, 1945, approximately 47,000 stabilization sleeves had been manufactured and distributed. Nearly every bazooka team in First Army had access to modified ammunition. Training was minimal. 15 minutes showing gunners how to slide the sleeve onto the rocket before loading. Some soldiers called them Dalton's pipes. Others called them the Panzer killers. One sergeant from Texas called them the straighteners because they made rockets fly straight. The real test wasn't in workshops or proving grounds. It was waiting in the frozen forests of Belgium, where German armor still advanced and American infantry still fought from foxholes in the snow. January 13, 1945, 2:34 p.m., Houffalize, Belgium, temperature 23°. Visibility 400 yards in light snow. German Oberst Heinrich Vogel, commanding officer of Panzer Division's 130th Panzer Regiment, studied tactical maps in the cramped interior of his command half-track while trying to understand reports that made no tactical sense. In the previous 72 hours, his regiment had lost 9 Panzer IV tanks and 4 Panther tanks to American bazooka fire, a 13-tank loss rate that was statistically impossible based on every combat engagement from North Africa to Normandy. American bazookas had always been marginally effective at best, reliably ineffective at worst. German tank doctrine, developed through 4 years of combat, treated American infantry anti-tank weapons as negligible threats. Panzers operated with confidence that frontal armor provided near immunity to bazooka fire at combat ranges beyond 50 meters. Something had fundamentally changed. Vogel's intelligence officer, Hauptmann Ernst Weber, a former Berlin University mathematics professor, had compiled ballistic analysis from tank commanders who'd survived bazooka attacks. The data revealed an anomaly. American rockets were now flying in perfectly straight trajectories with virtually zero deviation, striking armor at perpendicular angles that maximized penetration. Previous engagement reports showed American rockets wobbling mid-flight, often striking at 15-30-degree angles that caused deflection. Now, every observed impact was square on. "They've modified the ammunition somehow," Weber said, pointing to sketches compiled from survivor accounts. Tank commanders report seeing something unusual about the rockets, possibly an attachment or sleeve around the warhead before launch. Vogel stared at the sketches with growing unease. German military doctrine was built on systematic analysis, battlefield testing, and incremental improvement. The idea that Americans had identified a fundamental flaw in their own weapon system and developed, manufactured, and deployed a correction in less than 4 weeks contradicted everything Vogel understood about their military's bureaucratic sluggishness. "How many modified rockets have been observed?" Vogel asked. Battalion-level intelligence estimates approximately 60% of American bazooka teams in this sector are now equipped with modified ammunition. 60% in 3 weeks. The Americans had retooled production, manufactured tens of thousands of units, and distributed them across an entire army group while simultaneously fighting the largest German offensive of the war. The speed was incomprehensible, but the numbers didn't lie. On January 10th, Panzers engaged American positions near Nouville. Standard tactical approach, armor-led assault with infantry support. Results: 5 tanks destroyed in 12 minutes, 3 to modified bazookas, 2 to standard anti-tank guns. On January 12th, 130th Panzer Regiment attempted to break through American lines at Foy. Result: 4 tanks destroyed, all by bazooka fire, all from ranges previously considered safe. The American infantry had become tank killers. The first direct engagement where Vogel personally witnessed the modified rockets came on January 14th near Borsy. His regiment's lead Panther tank, commanded by Oberfeldwebel Klaus Zimmermann, a veteran with 31 confirmed kills across 2 years of Eastern Front combat, advanced toward American positions dug into a tree line 200 meters away. Zimmermann followed doctrine: frontal armor toward the enemy, turret traversing to identify threats, coaxial machine gun suppressing infantry. The American bazooka team fired from behind fallen timber. The rocket left the tube trailing white exhaust and flew without deviation, without wobble, like a bullet. It struck Zimmermann's Panther on the frontal glacis plate, 47 millimeters of sloped armor that had previously deflected 3 American rockets in combat near Bastogne. This time, the shape-charge warhead penetrated clean through, detonating inside the fighting compartment. The Panther's ammunition exploded 3 seconds later, blowing the 56-ton tank's turret 12 feet into the air. Vogel watched through binoculars, his hands suddenly cold despite fur-lined gloves. Zimmermann had been one of the regiment's best commanders, cautious, experienced, tactically sound. He'd positioned the Panther according to textbook doctrine, presenting the strongest armor to the threat. It hadn't mattered. The Americans fired again. A second Panther, 180 meters distant, took a rocket through the side armor. The crew bailed out as flames erupted from engine vents. A third Panther attempted to reverse into cover. The bazooka team tracked it, led the target, fired. The rocket struck the turret ring, a vulnerable junction between turret and hull, and jammed the turret traverse mechanism. Immobilized, the Panther withdrew, using only its driver's vision, firing blind. In 7 minutes, 3 Panthers, representing 168 tons of German engineering and approximately 780,000 Reichsmarks of production cost, had been neutralized by 6 American soldiers carrying weapons that weighed 13 pounds and cost $111 per unit to manufacture. That night, Vogel convened his tank commanders in a village church that had survived bombardment through architectural luck. 18 officers sat in pews designed for Belgian farmers, listening to Vogel explain the new tactical reality in blunt terms. The American bazooka is no longer a minor threat. Treat it with the same respect as their M10 tank destroyers. Do not advance within 250 meters of suspected infantry positions without reconnaissance by fire. Do not present frontal armor and assume invulnerability. The enemy has adapted their technology to defeat our armor. We must adapt our tactics to their technology. The officers understood what Vogel wasn't saying explicitly. German panzers had lost their psychological advantage. For 3 years, German armor had operated knowing that enemy infantry feared them. That fear translated into hesitation, poor aim, premature retreats. American infantry with ineffective bazookas had often withdrawn rather than engage. Now they held positions, waited for optimal range, fired with confidence that their weapons worked. On January 15th, First Army intelligence intercepted German radio communications that had been decoded through ultra-decryption at Bletchley Park. One transmission, from Panzer Division to 5th Panzer Army headquarters, was remarkably candid. American anti-tank effectiveness has increased dramatically. Frontal assaults against entrenched infantry positions now result in unacceptable armor losses. Recommend tactical revision, emphasizing infantry clearing operations before armor commitment. Captain Dalton, reading that decrypt in a heated command trailer outside Bastogne while drinking coffee that tasted like diesel exhaust, realized what it meant. The Germans were being forced to change doctrine, to abandon their preferred tactic of armor spearhead assaults, because American infantry could now kill their tanks reliably. The psychological shift was as important as the technical one. By January 20th, American forces had tallied results: 89 confirmed German tank kills by modified bazooka ammunition in 9 days of combat. Compared to the same time period in December, using standard ammunition, 31 kills. The improvement rate was 287%, nearly triple, but effective kill rate per shot had increased from 23% to 71%, which matched the original doctrinal prediction. The modified bazookas hadn't made American soldiers superhuman. They'd simply made the weapon work as it was always supposed to work. But in warfare, reliability is revolution. February 7th, 1945. The Battle of the Bulge was over. German forces had retreated across the Rhine, leaving behind 800 destroyed tanks, 1,000 aircraft, and 100,000 casualties. American forces had paid their own terrible price. 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, 23,000 captured or missing. But the German offensive, Hitler's last major gamble, had failed. Captain Robert Dalton stood in the main assembly hall of General Motors' Cadillac Division factory in Detroit, Michigan, watching the production line manufacture its 127,000th stabilization sleeve. The factory floor was surprisingly quiet compared to January's frantic pace. Production rate had stabilized at 6,000 units per day, sufficient to supply American forces advancing into Germany while maintaining reserve stockpiles. Workers operated with practiced efficiency, stamping, grinding, welding, inspecting, transforming raw steel into precision components in assembly line rhythm. The plant manager, a 58-year-old industrial engineer named Margaret Dawson, walked Dalton through the facility while explaining improvements implemented since initial production. We reduced manufacturing time from 27 minutes per unit to 11 minutes through process optimization. Defect rate dropped from 3% to 0.4%. We trained 340 workers specifically for this product line, most of them women who'd never worked manufacturing before December. Dalton watched a worker in coveralls and safety goggles operate a stamping press, producing exhaust port apertures with repeatability measured in thousandths of an inch. She worked with confident precision, meeting production quotas while maintaining quality standards that would have been considered exceptional in peacetime. Her name tag read, Sarah Mitchell. "How many lives do you think this saved?" Dawson asked. Dalton had done the math multiple times. Official after-action analysis estimates modified bazookas accounted for 89 confirmed tank kills during the Bulge, with probable secondary effects, disrupted assaults, delayed advances, psychological impact, that contributed to approximately 430 German casualties and prevented an estimated 180 American casualties through defensive superiority. But those are conservative estimates that only measure direct combat effects. The real impact was harder to quantify. When German commanders realized American infantry could reliably kill their tanks, they changed operational doctrine, slowing advances, increasing caution, committing armor only after infantry cleared positions. That caution translated into lost momentum, missed objectives, operational delays that gave American forces time to reinforce, reorganize, and counterattack. The bazooka modification hadn't single-handedly won the Battle of the Bulge, but it had contributed to German defeat in ways that statistics couldn't fully capture. By war's end, in May 1945, American forces had fired approximately 340,000 modified bazooka rockets across European and Pacific theaters. The stabilization sleeve became standard issue, manufactured in such quantities that surplus units remained in military stockpiles until the 1970s. The modification was so successful that post-war bazooka designs, including the M20 Super Bazooka introduced in 1945, incorporated integrated stabilization features directly into the rocket design. Captain Dalton's personal trajectory reflected the unpredictable nature of wartime recognition. He received the Legion of Merit for technical achievement, was promoted to major, and finished the war coordinating weapons development at Aberdeen Proving Ground. After demobilization in 1946, he returned to West Virginia, resumed work as a mining engineer, and lived quietly until his death in 1983. For 37 years, his contribution remained classified under military secrecy protocols. Most people in Welch, West Virginia, knew him as Bob Dalton, the mining engineer, not as the man who revolutionized anti-tank warfare. Declassification came in 1980 when the Army released wartime records documenting weapons development programs. A military historian researching bazooka effectiveness discovered Dalton's original 8-page technical report in archived files. The historian, Dr. Jennifer Morrison, tracked down Dalton, then 71 years old and retired, and interviewed him for 6 hours in his small house overlooking the Tug River Valley. "I just saw a problem and fixed it," Dalton told Morrison. "That's what you do in mining. You find problems underground, and you solve them before they kill people." The bazooka was the same thing. Soldiers were dying because something was broken. I knew how to fix broken things. Morrison's 1982 book, Innovation Under Fire, Weapons Development in World War II, devoted an entire chapter to the bazooka modification. The chapter title was deliberately provocative, "The Moronic Pipe That Changed Tank Warfare." She explained how Dalton's solution had been called moronic by initial reviewers who couldn't believe something so simple could work, before field testing proved them spectacularly wrong. The book reached Master Sergeant Frank Kowalski, who'd manufactured the first 5 prototypes in a freezing Belgian workshop. Kowalski, then 68 and living in Philadelphia, called Dalton and spoke with him for the first time since 1945. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Near the end, Kowalski said, "You know what I remember most? You never acted like you'd done something important. You just wanted it to work. Because soldiers needed it to work," Dalton replied. The broader legacy extended beyond individual recognition. The bazooka modification became a case study in military innovation, taught at West Point, analyzed at the Army War College, cited in Pentagon documents about rapid technology deployment. It demonstrated several principles that reshaped American military doctrine. First, operational innovation could originate from unexpected sources. Dalton wasn't a career weapons engineer or a senior military strategist. He was a mining engineer with an officer's commission who happened to understand rotational physics. His outsider perspective allowed him to see problems that specialists had overlooked. Second, American industrial capacity could pivot with extraordinary speed when properly motivated, from concept to mass production in 3 weeks. A timeline that peacetime bureaucracy would have considered impossible because the threat was existential and the solution was proven. Third, simple solutions were often superior to complex ones. The stabilization sleeve didn't require exotic materials, advanced manufacturing, or theoretical breakthroughs. It required steel pipe, precise machining, and clear understanding of basic physics. Complexity wasn't the answer, clarity was. Fourth, field-level innovation required institutional flexibility. Dalton succeeded partly because General Hodges was willing to listen to a captain who broke protocol, because Aberdeen engineers were willing to test an unconventional design, because Detroit factory managers were willing to retool production lines on emergency schedules. Rigid hierarchy would have killed the project through procedural delays. On April 12, 1984, Major Robert Dalton died at age 72 from complications of black lung disease, an occupational hazard from decades of coal mine work. His funeral in Welch, West Virginia, drew 200 people, including 7 surviving members of the 99th Infantry Division who'd fought in the Battle of the Bulge. One of them, James Harding, the sergeant who'd fired the first modified bazooka, stood at the graveside and said, "Bob gave us a weapon that worked when we needed it most. He gave us a fighting chance. That's all any soldier can ask for." The stabilization sleeve itself, those simple steel pipes that had been called moronic, idiotic, impossibly crude, resided in military museums across America. The Smithsonian Institution displayed one in its World War II collection, with a placard explaining its significance. Aberdeen Proving Ground maintained several in its historical weapons archive. The Army Ordnance Museum featured a complete bazooka with modified rocket in a display titled "Innovation in Combat: How a Coal Miner Changed Anti-Tank Warfare." But perhaps the most appropriate memorial sat in a place few people ever saw, the main workshop at Fort Benning's Armor School, where modern soldiers trained on contemporary anti-tank weapons. Mounted on the wall, preserved in a glass case, was the original prototype, the first stabilization sleeve that Sergeant Kowalski had machined in Belgium on December 20th, 1944. Below it, a brass plaque bore an inscription: "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." When doctrine fails, innovation succeeds. When weapons don't work, make them work. This pipe saved American lives because one soldier refused to accept failure as inevitable. The American experience in World War II was built on moments like Dalton's innovation. Countless individuals seeing problems, refusing to accept institutional inertia, and creating solutions through determination and practical ingenuity. The nation that converted automobile factories into tank plants, that launched ships faster than enemies could sink them, that mobilized an entire continent's industrial capacity for war, that same nation could take a mining engineer's simple idea and turn it into 340,000 precision-manufactured components distributed across 2 theaters of global war in 4 months. The legacy endured not because it was technologically revolutionary, but because it was fundamentally American. Pragmatic, optimistic, determinedly focused on making things work when they needed to work, refusing to accept that problems were unsolvable simply because solutions weren't obvious. Robert Dalton saw soldiers dying, understood why they were dying, and fixed the problem. The solution wasn't elegant, it was effective. In war, that's the only thing that matters. And sometimes, the difference between defeat and victory is nothing more complicated than a simple steel pipe, precisely manufactured, deployed by determined people who refuse to let their weapons fail. If stories of forgotten heroes and incredible W2 innovations fascinate you, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another untold story of American ingenuity under fire. Drop a comment below. What other overlooked W2 innovations deserve recognition? And share this video with anyone who loves history that textbooks forgot. We're just getting started. There are dozens more stories like this waiting to be told.